Hey guys, Paul here. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about monster attack point values and defense point values. It's something that I actually have alluded to a little bit in another recent video, but I think that it kind of deserves its own just full discussion because I have suggestions for what I think Konami should probably do in this regard. And I think that it's nothing really new or novel, but actually rather things that Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of used to do in its own way. So, as we know, monsters have attack points, monsters have defense points, and I think generally speaking, monsters that have high attack are supposed to be the stronger ones, and monsters that have high defense are supposed to kind of be defensive and useful, but maybe not, permanent fixtures on your field. It's maybe to like defend yourself for a bit and then you contribute them for a monster or whatever. There are also some other trends, like the fact that, attack points are supposed to sort of scale with level. There's sort of an idea of like what the highest possible attack value at a given level is meant to be. So for instance, level 4 monsters have basically a cap attack value of like 2,000. It's kind of pushed at like 2,100 and stuff these days. But typically if a monster has over 2,000, there will maybe be a debilitating effect that makes it a little bit harder to use. You can see this like as early back as like, let's say, Zombriah the Dark comes to mind. That's just one I've used a lot in Rare Hunters. It's got 2,100 attack, but it can't attack your opponent directly, and each time it destroys a monster, it does lose some of the attack points. And of course, you've got the things like Goblin Attack Force and some of its like offshoot forms they've got like 2,300 attack points, but they switch to defense mode after attacking, and they can't switch for 2 full turns. So your opponent has 2 whole turns to basically attack them and destroy them, and usually they have less defense points. Another thing too is just that early on in Yu-Gi-Oh! Effect monsters in general like had lower stats than vanilla monsters. Vanillas were the big, beefy beat sticks that you used, and effect monsters were more so just sort of like utility, one and done cards. Yeah, so now that we've established all of that, what do I actually think Yu-Gi-Oh! Needs to do to change this, or what could they do to change this in the modern day? Well, the big one is I think that boss monsters need to kind of have their attack and defense stats balanced around how strong they are and how easily accessible they are. A common problem that I know we all talk about is generic extra deck monsters, right? That's your Baron de Fleur, that's your Borreload Savage Dragon, that's any number of the kind of like omni-negating monsters that show up and are oftentimes just, some Xyz monster, some synchro that just sort of takes anything to make. Apollosa comes to mind, whatever. But I think that the biggest issue I tend to have with those monsters, outside of the fact that I don't like omni-negates, you guys know this, is more so that they're also so strong that it's hard to actually swing over the monsters. So when you're faced with a Borreload Savage Dragon or a Baron, it's not just about like baiting out its negation. Yeah, you have to bait that out. So that can mean using some spell like a Lightning Storm or a Mind Control or just anything that they have to negate because it would destroy them otherwise. Then that gets negated, but now you still have to swing over the monster. And even like Dark Ruler No More still kind of leaves you with this conundrum. I mean, as strong of a card as that is, yeah, it can negate all your opponent's monster's effects, but you are still sort of tasked with swinging over this 3,000 plus beat stick, and that can be really tough to do for decks that, aren't able to necessarily like pump out huge boss monsters en masse every turn. So I think that a really good balancing mechanism that would work well here is basically making these generic extract monsters weaker, right? Like, I think that you decrease these monsters' attack or defense points by like, 6, 800, maybe even 1,000 in some cases, because they're generic and they have strong effects and any deck can use them. So there's got to be some drawback, and I think that the drawback should be that they should be easy to swing over. A monster that I've used as an example countless times, and I still will use it because it's a very good one, is Herald of the Arc Light. So Herald of the Arc Light is sort of a walking floodgate, it banishes things that are sent to the grave from the hand or deck, and also it is an omni-negate. It does have to tribute itself to do that, which I think is also a really great sort of design mechanic, like let the monster leave the field if it's getting to omni-negate things. But the fact of the matter is, because it's so weak, with only, 600 attack and 1,000 defense, you can swing over this monster. And I think that that's good. Like, I think that it makes sense. It shouldn't be strong and also be able to do so much, right? I think that the monsters that should have high attack points are the ones that are maybe threatening in the offensive sort of areas of like being able to attack multiple times or being able to do like piercing damage. They should be a threat in that regard, but I think that monsters that have more defensive effects, negations, and just sort of like it can't be targeted, it can't be this, it can't be that, should have maybe high defense points. And just in general, the strong generic stuff should have lower average stats to balance out the fact that it's generic. I think that if you're using boss monsters that are from your deck's like native archetype and they're locked into that archetype, then they should be allowed to have like higher stats. An example I remember making, like I think maybe around this time last year, I don't know, was with agents, right? So I play the agent deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, and I have a lot of fun with it. It's a good time, but the thing is, I always found myself like kind of at a bit of an impasse between summoning Master Flare Hyperion, which is the deck's themed boss monster, and then summoning like Baron de Fleur, which is just generic and easy to make, and in a lot of ways kind of just better. As somebody who likes to play pure decks, it sucks to have to make that decision because really it shouldn't be such an obvious, oh, just summon Baron de Fleur, it's the better, more generic card. I think if Baron de Fleur had like, 2,400 attack points and like even less defense points, then maybe there wouldn't be as much reason to just summon it. And that's not to say that that would completely solve these problems or even make these monsters obsolete. I'm not trying to make generic extract monsters unusable. I'm just trying to say that they should maybe be like seen as a little bit less valuable or less immediately preferable compared to like on-theme monsters, which I think should get the privilege of having higher attack points, having higher defense points, and things like that. So that way you can maybe swing over them more easily and it solves your problem for you. I also think though that it's nice that there can maybe still be some generic like non-effect monsters that are relevant in the game. I remember during the Xyz era, for instance, what was the card? Gem-Knight Pearl was the strongest, at least for a while, the strongest rank 4 Xyz monster. But it also didn't have an effect. But it had 2,600 attack points. It was even stronger than the 2,500 attack point, number 39 Utopia. And other rank 4 monsters generally were on the weaker end, actually. They would typically have like around like 2,000, 2,100 attack points maybe. I think of like Abyss Dweller, I think of Castel, I think of Silent Honor Arc, even Exiton Knight. Those sorts of cards were weaker in exchange for having like pretty good effects. I think that they struck a really nice design balance with them, and that's something that it would be nice to see us sort of go back to. Plus, because Gem-Knight Pearl was not actually an effect monster, it couldn't even be hit by the very popular at the time, Fiendish Chain. So I think that would be a really cool way to bring vanilla monsters back into the picture without, of course, the downsides of having to actually run vanilla monsters in your deck, but they can still be like extra deck things. They've done this with a few cards in the past. I remember Gaia Knight, the Force of Earth, was one of the strong, like, generic, just sort of like non-effect synchro monsters. I also know that they did Gaia Saber, the Link monster version. I don't think that that got quite as much play. It did a little bit early on just because of like its arrows and the Link 3 thing. But that might be kind of fun. That's more of a side thought to the overall conversation, but these are monsters where you could really afford to give them the extremely, like, acutely high attack point values because they literally have no other effects. And it gives them a little bit more of a role to fill as opposed to just being complete and utter, like, just like, why would you make this over something else? Will it solve the problem? No, not really. People are still going to go for negations. I don't think that that's ever really changing. But I just think like if you can at least like tip the scales of like risk and reward, we would see maybe a few more nuances develop in that department. So that's what I think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Needs to kind of be doing with attack and defense point values. I think that monsters should have like really high defense and low attack, or have high attack, but like only if you have like offensive style effects and theming. Yeah, so let me know what you guys think about this. Do you feel like this is something that would be relevant? Do you think it would make any dent at all? And do you think it's not really worth bothering with because, well, things are how they are and we should just be happy with them? I don't know. Anyways, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. I've been trying to upload a new video every day in February. We'll see how long it lasts. But yeah, you can, of course, let me know what you think of this or just leave other suggestions down in the comments. All right, that's going to be it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Pass turn.